They said she was cursed. They said her very breath brought death to all who loved her. And when the witch dragged her into the darkest part of the Whispering Woods and left her there to die, everyone in the kingdom believed it was for the best. But what happened next would shake the very foundations of the royal court and reveal a truth so shocking that even the king himself would fall to his knees. Her name was Ilara, and this is the story of how a nameless night changed everything.
The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Ravenshallow like ghostly fingers, and in the town square, young Ilara Blackthorn knelt in chains. Her dark hair fell across her face like a curtain of midnight, but it could not hide the tears that traced silver paths down her pale cheeks. The crowd gathered around her was thick with hatred and fear. "Witch child!" someone screamed from the back. "Deathbringer!" Ilara lifted her head, and those who met her emerald eyes quickly looked away. Not because they were evil, no, quite the opposite. Her eyes held such pure innocence, such desperate confusion, that it made their accusations feel like daggers in their own hearts. But fear is a powerful thing, and fear had consumed Ravenshallow for months. It had started with the roses. 3 months ago, Ilara had been walking through Lord Aldrich's garden when she'd touched a wilting rose, whispering a gentle wish for it to bloom again. And bloom it did, more beautiful than it had ever been. But within an hour, every other flower in the garden had withered and died. The gardener had found them the next morning, blackened and twisted, as if touched by frost in the height of summer. Then came the incident with the baker's son. Little Thomas had been dying of fever, and Ilara, with tears in her eyes, had held his burning hand and prayed for his recovery. The fever broke instantly. Thomas sat up in bed, completely healed, laughing and asking for bread. But before the family could celebrate, a knock came at the door. A messenger brought terrible news. Thomas's grandfather, who lived 3 villages away, had died at the exact moment the boy was healed. The exact same moment. "She trades life for life," the people whispered. "She is cursed by dark magic."
But Ilara knew nothing of magic. She was just 17, an orphan who had lived with her grandmother until the old woman passed away the previous winter. All she had ever wanted was to help people, to bring some light into their pain. She never understood why her kindness seemed to bring such terrible consequences. Now, as she knelt in the square, with iron shackles cutting into her wrists, she watched as the village elder spoke in hushed tones with a figure that made her blood run cold. Morgartha, the witch, stood at the edge of the crowd, her wild gray hair streaming in the wind like smoke, her black robes billowing around her skeletal frame. Her face was ancient and cruel, with eyes like chips of ice that seemed to see straight through to your soul. "The girl is dangerous," Morgartha declared, her voice carrying across the square like the call of a carrion bird. "I have seen it in the runes. She pulls life from one place and gives it to another, but she cannot control it. Soon she will drain entire villages to feed her power. She must be taken far from here." "What do you propose?" asked Elder Marcus, a fat man who owned most of the grain stores in town. Morgartha smiled, and it was like watching a skull grin. "There is a place in the Whispering Woods, a grove where the old magic still sleeps. If she is left there, the ancient spirits will judge her. If she is truly innocent—" The witch paused, letting the silence stretch like a blade. "If she is innocent, they will protect her. If not, nature will claim what is hers." Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. The Whispering Woods were a place of legends and nightmares, where trees grew so tall they blocked out the sun, and the very air seemed to watch you. No one who entered those woods ever returned. Even hardened knights avoided the place. "Please," Ilara whispered, finding her voice at last. "I don't know why these things happen. I never meant to hurt anyone. I just wanted to help." "Silence!" Morgartha struck the ground with her gnarled staff, and the sound echoed like thunder. "Your tears will not wash away the curse that flows through your veins, child. Accept your fate with dignity." Elder Marcus nodded gravely. "It is decided. At dawn tomorrow you will be taken to the Whispering Woods. May the gods have mercy on your soul." That night, locked in the village jail, Ilara curled up on the moldy straw and wept until she had no tears left. Through the barred window, she could see the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, and she wondered if she would live to see them again. "Grandmother," she whispered to the empty cell, "if you can hear me, please help me understand. Why am I cursed? What did I do wrong?" But only silence answered her, and in that silence, her fate was sealed.
Dawn came gray and cold, like a funeral shroud drawn across the world. Ilara was dragged from her cell and loaded onto a wooden cart, her hands still bound with iron chains. The metal had rubbed her wrists raw, but she barely felt the pain anymore. Everything seemed distant and dreamlike, as if she were watching someone else's nightmare unfold. Morgartha sat beside the cart driver, her black cloak pulled tight against the morning chill. She hummed an old song under her breath, a melody that made Ilara's skin crawl and set the horses to nervous dancing. Behind them, a small crowd followed at a distance, but their faces were turned away. Whether from shame or fear, Ilara couldn't tell. The journey to the edge of the Whispering Woods took 3 hours. With each passing mile, the landscape grew wilder and more desolate. Green fields gave way to rocky ground covered in twisted thorn bushes. The very air seemed to grow thicker, pressing down on them like an invisible weight. And then they saw it. The Whispering Woods rose before them like a wall of living darkness. The trees were ancient beyond measure, their trunks so massive it would take 20 men holding hands to circle them. Their branches intertwined high above, forming a canopy so dense that no sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. Even from a distance they could hear it, the sound that gave the woods their name, a constant, low whispering, as if 1,000 voices were having conversations just beyond the edge of hearing. The cart driver pulled his horses to a stop 100 yards from the tree line. His face was pale, and his hands shook as he held the reins. "I go no further," he announced. "No amount of coin is worth stepping foot in that cursed place." Morgartha cackled and climbed down from the cart with surprising agility for someone so ancient. "Then this is where we part ways, child." She grabbed Ilara by the arm and hauled her to her feet. The chains around Ilara's wrists clinked softly in the morning air. "Wait," Ilara said,
her voice barely a whisper. "At least tell me why. Why are you doing this to me? I never did anything to hurt you." For a moment, something flickered in the witch's icy eyes. Was it regret? Pity? But then her expression hardened again, and she spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "Some paths are chosen for us before we are born, girl. You carry a power that could reshape the world or destroy it. Better you die here than let that power fall into the wrong hands." "What power?" Ilara cried. "I don't understand any of this."
But Morgotha was already turning away, walking back toward the cart. "Perhaps you will find your answers in the depths of the woods, or perhaps you will simply find peace." The witch climbed back onto the cart, and within moments they were gone. Ilara stood alone at the edge of the whispering woods, iron chains binding her hands, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the terrible whispering of the trees for company. For a long time she simply stood there, staring into the darkness between the massive trunks. Part of her wanted to turn around and run, to take her chances on the open road rather than enter that nightmare realm. But where could she go? Every village for 100 miles knew her face, knew the stories of the cursed girl who brought death with her kindness. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and still she stood frozen with indecision. It wasn't until the first fat raindrops began to fall that she finally took a step forward, then another and another. Within minutes, the darkness of the forest had swallowed her completely. The moment she crossed the tree line, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The rain that had been falling gently on the open ground became a steady drizzle that seemed to seep through the canopy and cling to everything with icy fingers. But strangest of all was the silence. The whispering that had been so clear from outside was gone, replaced by a profound quiet that seemed to muffle even the sound of her own footsteps. Ilara walked deeper into the forest, following what might have been a path, or might have been just a natural gap between the enormous trees. The forest floor was covered in centuries of fallen leaves that squelched beneath her feet like wet flesh. Twisted roots rose from the ground like grasping claws, and more than once she stumbled and nearly fell, her bound hands unable to catch her balance. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time seemed to flow differently here. The light never changed, remaining that same dim green-tinted twilight that filtered down through the canopy. And always, always there was the feeling of being watched. Not by any creature she could see, but by the forest itself, as if the very trees had eyes. It was when she paused to rest against the trunk of a particularly massive oak that she first heard it. Not the whispering of before, but something else. Something that made her heart leap with desperate hope. The sound of hoofbeats coming closer through the woods.
Ilara pressed herself against the rough bark of the oak tree, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give away her position. The hoofbeats were getting closer, accompanied by the soft jingle of mail and the creak of leather. Through the dim green light of the forest, she caught her first glimpse of the rider. He was magnificent and terrifying all at once. mounted on a coal-black destrier that seemed to glide silently over the forest floor despite its massive size. The knight was clad in armor that appeared to be forged from shadows themselves. His helm was crafted in the shape of a wolf's head, with empty eye sockets that seemed to burn with their own inner fire. A long sword hung at his side, its pommel carved in the likeness of a raven with spread wings. Most knights wore colors, bright banners and heraldry that proclaimed their house and lineage. This one wore nothing but black, with no markings or symbols to identify him. He was nameless, faceless, a phantom warrior who seemed to belong to the darkness of the woods as much to the world of men. Ilara held her breath as he drew closer, praying that he would pass by without noticing her. Stories of knights who rode alone in cursed forests were never stories of rescue and salvation. They were stories of madness and death, of men who had given their souls to dark powers in exchange for strength. But as the rider came alongside her hiding place, his horse suddenly stopped and turned its great head toward her. The knight's helmet followed the animal's gaze, and those burning eye sockets fixed on her crouched form. For a moment that stretched like eternity, neither of them moved. Then slowly, the knight dismounted from his horse. He moved with fluid grace despite the weight of his armor, each step deliberate and controlled. When he stood before her, Ilara had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. He was easily the tallest man she had ever seen. "You are far from any village, girl," he said, and his voice was like distant thunder, muffled by the wolf helm, but still carrying the weight of authority. "What brings you to the Whispering Woods?" Ilara opened her mouth to speak, but only a croak came out. Her throat was dry with fear and thirst. She tried again, forcing the words past her trembling lips. I was left here to die, I think." The knight tilted his head, and she caught a glimpse of something through the eye slits of his helmet. Not the flames she had expected, but eyes of the deepest blue she had ever seen. Human eyes filled with something that might have been compassion. "Show me your hands," he commanded. Trembling, Ilara raised her bound wrists. The iron chains had cut deep furrows in her skin, and dried blood crusted the metal links. The knight stared at the shackles for a long moment, then reached for his sword. Ilara flinched backward, certain that her end had come. But instead of striking her down, the knight knelt before her and carefully positioned the blade beneath the chains. With one swift motion, he severed the iron links as if they were made of straw. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Ilara rubbed her raw wrists, wincing as feeling returned to her numb fingers. When she looked up, the knight was studying her with those impossibly blue eyes. "What is your name?" he asked. "Ilara," she whispered. "Ilara Blackthorn." "And who left you here to die, Ilara Blackthorn?" The kindness in his voice, the simple fact that he had used her name, rather than calling her witch or cursed one, broke something inside her.
All the fear and pain and loneliness of the past months came pouring out in a rush of words. She told him about the roses, about little Thomas and his grandfather, about the accusations and the trial. She told him about Morgotha and her pronouncement of doom, about being dragged to this forsaken place and left to face whatever darkness dwelt here. Through it all, the knight listened in silence, never interrupting, never judging. When she finally finished, tears streaming down her cheeks, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached up and, to her amazement, began to remove his helmet. "Please," she said quickly, "you don't have to." "My name is Gareth," he said, as the wolf helm came away, and Ilara gasped. He was young, perhaps no more than 25, with strong features and hair as black as a raven's wing. But it was his eyes that captured her attention. Those blue eyes that had seemed so kind were now filled with a deep, abiding sadness that spoke of losses too great to bear. Across his left cheek ran a jagged scar that disappeared beneath his chin, the mark of some terrible battle. But even more shocking than his youth or his scars was the simple fact that he had revealed his face to her at all. Knights who rode alone in cursed woods did not show their faces to strangers. They did not give their names or treat condemned witches with gentleness. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you helping me?" Gareth set his helmet aside and looked up at the canopy of leaves far above. "Because once, long ago, someone helped me when the whole world had turned against me. And because..." He paused, his jaw tightening with some inner struggle. "Because I know what it is to be condemned for something beyond your control." He stood and extended his hand to her. "Come, these woods are dangerous after dark, and night falls quickly here. I know of a place where we can shelter." Ilara stared at his outstretched hand. Everything she had been taught told her not to trust him. Nameless knights were harbingers of doom, agents of dark powers who served only themselves. But his eyes held no deception, no malice, only sadness and a kindness that seemed almost foreign in this dark place. She took his hand. The moment their skin touched, something extraordinary happened. A warmth spread up Ilara's arm, not the heat of fever or fire, but something deeper and more profound. It was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, like the first warm day of spring after a harsh winter. And for just an instant, she could swear she saw something in Gareth's eyes, a flicker of recognition, of understanding that went beyond words. Then the moment passed, and he was simply a knight helping her to her feet. But the warmth remained, settling in her chest like a small flame that pushed back the cold darkness of the woods. "What was that?" she asked. Gareth's expression was unreadable. "I don't know," he said, "but we should go. The spirits of this place stir when the sun sets, and they are not always friendly to living visitors." He helped her mount his great destrier, then swung up behind her. As they rode deeper into the whispering woods, Ilara found herself leaning back against his armored chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence. For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. But neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows between the trees, her ice-blue eyes narrowing with calculation and rage. Morgatha had followed them into the woods, and she was not pleased by this turn of events.
The sanctuary Gareth led her to was like nothing Ilara had ever seen. Hidden in a grove of silver birch trees that seemed to glow with their own inner light, it appeared to be the ruins of an ancient temple. Graceful arches rose from the forest floor, their stone carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed from the corner of the eye. Vines covered most of the structure, but they were not the dead, twisted things that grew elsewhere in the woods. These were vibrant and green, dotted with small white flowers that glowed like stars in the gathering dusk.
"This place," Ilara whispered as Gareth helped her down from his horse. "It feels different." "Sacred," Gareth agreed. "Built by the first people who lived in these lands, long before kingdoms and kings. The dark spirits of the woods cannot enter here." He led her through what had once been the main entrance of the temple, now little more than a gap between two crumbling pillars. Inside, the floor was covered with soft moss that felt like carpet beneath their feet. A natural spring bubbled up from the center of the space, its water crystal clear and singing with a sound like distant bells. "Drink," Gareth said, kneeling by the spring and cupping the water in his hands. "This water has healing properties. It will ease the pain in your wrists and restore your strength." Ilara knelt beside him and drank deeply. The water was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted, and as it flowed down her throat, she felt warmth spreading through her entire body. The cuts on her wrists began to tingle, then itch, and when she looked down, she gasped in amazement. The wounds were healing before her eyes, the torn flesh knitting itself back together until only faint white lines remained. "How is this possible?" she breathed. Gareth was silent for a long moment, staring into the depths of the spring. "The old magic," he said finally. "It still flows in certain places for those who know how to find it." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "You've been here before." "Many times." He stood and began removing pieces of his armor, setting them carefully aside. Beneath the black mail, he wore a simple tunic of dark blue that brought out the color of his eyes. "This has been my refuge for a long time."
Refuge from what? Again, that look of deep sadness crossed his features. "From the world, from my past, from what I am." Before Ilara could ask what he meant, he moved to one of the ruined walls and pressed his hand against a section of stone carved with intertwining spirals. There was a soft, grinding sound, and part of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. "I keep supplies here," he explained, disappearing into the darkness. He returned moments later with blankets, food, and a bundle of dry wood. "We'll build a fire. The nights grow cold in these woods, even in summer." As Gareth built up the fire and laid out their simple meal, bread, cheese, and dried fruit that tasted better than any feast Ilara had ever eaten, she found herself studying him in the flickering light. There was something almost otherworldly about him, a quality that went beyond his obvious skill as a warrior. He moved with perfect grace, every gesture economical and precise. His senses seemed impossibly sharp. More than once, he looked up at sounds she couldn't hear or shadows she couldn't see. "Gareth," she said, as they sat by the fire, sharing the simple meal, "who are you really? And don't tell me you're just a knight. Knights don't know about places like this. They don't carry healing water or have secret chambers in ruined temples." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. The fire crackled between them, and somewhere in the distance an owl called through the darkness. Finally, he spoke, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it. "Do you know the legend of the Silverwood Knights?" Ilara frowned. I think so. They were supposed to be guardians, weren't they? Protectors of the old magic. But that's just a story. They disappeared centuries ago." "Did they?" Gareth reached into his tunic and pulled out a pendant, a silver tree with spreading branches hung on a chain of the same metal. The moment the light hit it, it began to glow with a soft, warm radiance that pushed back the shadows. The Silverwood Knights were the guardians of the balance between the old world and the new. They protected sacred places like this one, and they watched over those who carried the old blood in their veins. Ilara's heart began to race. The old blood? The ones who could speak to the trees and call down the rain, who could heal with a touch and see the threads that connect all living things. His blue eyes met hers across the fire, the ones who could pull life from one place and give it to another.
The words hit her like a physical blow. She scrambled backward, her hand flying to her throat.
No, that's impossible. I can't be.
"Can't you?" Gareth leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. "Tell me, Ilara, when you touched that rose and it bloomed, did it feel like magic to you? Or did it feel like the most natural thing in the world?" She wanted to deny it, wanted to tell him he was wrong, but the memory of that moment was crystal clear in her mind. When she had touched the dying flower and whispered her wish, it hadn't felt like casting a spell. It had felt like breathing, like her heart beating, natural and right, and as much a part of her as her own reflection. The old blood calls to like. That's why I felt it when I touched you. That's why the healing spring responded to your presence. That's why you're not afraid of me, though by all rights you should be.
Why should I be afraid of you?
The question slipped out before she could stop it. Gareth's hand went to the scar on his cheek, tracing its jagged length. "Because I am the last of the Silverwood Knights, Ilara, and I am also the man who destroyed them all." The fire crackled between them, and in its dancing light, Ilara saw something that made her breath catch. Gareth's shadow, cast on the wall behind him, was not the shadow of a man. It was the shadow of a wolf.
10 years ago, Gareth began, his voice hollow as winter wind. I was not the last of the Silverwood Knights. I was merely the youngest, the most eager to prove myself worthy of the silver tree. He stared into the fire, and Ilara could see the memories playing across his features like shadows cast by the flames. The owl called again in the distance, and she pulled her blanket closer around her shoulders, though she wasn't sure if she was cold from the night air or from the look in his eyes. Our order was ancient, as old as these woods themselves.
We were sworn to protect the balance between the world of men and the world of magic. For 1,000 years we had kept that balance. But balance is a fragile thing. He reached for a piece of wood and added it to the fire, sending sparks dancing up into the darkness. There were 13 of us then, 13 knights bound by oaths of brotherhood and service. We lived in a great hall hidden deep in these woods, and we rode out to guard the sacred places, to protect those who carried the old blood, to ensure that the ancient powers were not misused. "What happened?" Ilara whispered, though part of her didn't want to know. Gareth's jaw tightened, and she saw his hand unconsciously move to the hilt of his sword. "A woman came to us. She called herself Lady Morwen, and she was beautiful beyond description. Hair like spun gold, eyes like summer sky, voice like music itself. She claimed to be the last heir of the summer court, seeking our protection from enemies who would see her power enslaved." Something cold settled in Ilara's stomach. She was lying. Oh, she was everything she claimed to be. That was the trap. Gareth's laugh was bitter as winter ale. She was indeed the last of the summer court, and her power was real. But what she didn't tell us was that she had been corrupted by something far older and darker than any of us could imagine. He fell silent for a long moment, lost in memories that clearly brought him pain. When he continued, his voice was barely audible above the crackling of the fire. "I was assigned to be her personal guard. For weeks I rode with her through these woods, listening to her stories of the old days, learning secrets of magic that had been lost for centuries. And I fell in love with her. God help me. I fell in love with a creature that was already dead inside." Ilara felt a strange pang in her chest at his words, though she couldn't understand why. What was she really?
A vessel. Gareth's eyes met hers, and she saw pain there so deep it took her breath away. The entity that possessed her was ancient beyond measure, a thing of shadow and hunger that had been sleeping in the deepest parts of the earth for millennia. It had been waiting for someone with enough power to serve as its gateway into the world. Lady Morwen's bloodline made her perfect for its needs. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the air, and both of them flinched at the sudden sound. On the night of the autumn equinox, when the barriers between worlds are thinnest, she struck. The ritual she performed, it twisted the very nature of magic itself. Instead of balance, there was only hunger. Instead of harmony, there was only corruption. Gareth stood abruptly and walked to the edge of the firelight, staring out into the darkness of the woods. One by one, my brothers began to change. The magic that had always been our ally turned against us, corrupting our bodies and souls. Sir Edmund grew claws instead of fingers and began hunting the very people we were sworn to protect. Sir Marcus lost his human shape entirely, becoming something that belonged more to nightmare than to the waking world. "And you?" Ilara asked softly. "What happened to you?" Gareth was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with self-loathing. "I was her chosen vessel. The creature that wore Morwen's face had been grooming me from the beginning, preparing me to become its true host. On that terrible night,
As my brothers fell one by one to madness and corruption, she tried to complete the binding. He turned back toward the fire, and in the flickering light, Ilara could see tears glittering on his cheeks. She almost succeeded. I felt the darkness pouring into me, felt my humanity slipping away like water through cupped hands. But at the last moment, I managed to break free. I took up my sword, and his voice broke. I killed her. I killed the woman I loved to stop the thing that was using her. "That's not your fault," Ilara said fiercely, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "You saved everyone. You stopped—" "It stopped nothing," Gareth snarled, and for a moment his shadow on the wall seemed to grow larger, more wolfish. "Yes, I killed her, but it was too late. The corruption had already spread. My brothers were lost, transformed into monsters that would terrorize the countryside for years to come. And I carried a piece of that darkness inside me forever after." He held up his hand, and Ilara gasped. In the firelight, she could see that his fingernails were longer than they should be, more like claws than human nails. "The curse changes me, bit by bit, year by year. Someday I will be no different from the monsters I once called brother. But until that day comes, I guard these woods. I protect the sacred places. I try to balance the scales." Understanding crashed over Ilara like a cold wave. "That's why you saved me? Because you think I carry the old blood?" "I don't think it, Ilara. I know it." He knelt by the fire again, but he was careful to keep his distance from her. "The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?" Before she could answer, a new voice cut through the night like a blade through silk. "How touching! The cursed night and the witch child sharing stories by the fire." They both spun toward the sound, and there, at the edge of the sacred grove, stood Morgotha. But this was not the bent and withered crone who had condemned Ilara in the town square. This woman stood tall and proud, her gray hair now silver white and flowing like liquid moonlight. Her robes were no longer black, but deepest midnight blue, shot through with threads of silver that seemed to move on their own. And her eyes were not ice blue anymore. They were golden, like molten sunlight, and they held power that made the very air around her shimmer with heat. "Hello, nephew," she said, and her smile was sharp as a blade. "It's time we had a family reunion." The word nephew hung in the air like a curse, and Ilara felt the world tilt sideways around her. She looked from Morgotha to Gareth, seeing the same shock on his face that she felt in her own heart. "That's impossible," Gareth breathed, but even as he said it, Ilara could see the recognition dawning in his eyes. The shape of the cheekbones, the proud set of the shoulders, the way they both carried themselves like nobility born to command. How had she not seen it before? Morgotha stepped into the grove, and the very air around her began to change. The gentle glow of the silver birch trees dimmed, their white flowers curling in on themselves. The sweet song of the healing spring turned discordant, like a harp with broken strings. "Oh, but it's not impossible at all, dear boy," she purred, her voice now holding none of the crone's rasp. It was melodious and beautiful, like honey poured over poisoned wine. I am Morgana Silverwood, last daughter of the summer court, sister to your beloved father, who died so tragically when you were but a child." Gareth's hand moved to his sword, but Ilara could see the tremor in his fingers. "My father died in a hunting accident. You're not a hunting accident," Morgana laughed, and the sound was like crystal breaking. "Oh, my sweet nephew, how delightfully naive. Your father died because he discovered what I was planning. He tried to stop me, just as you tried to stop dear Morwen 10 years ago. The apple, as they say, doesn't fall far from the tree." The pieces clicked into Ilara's mind with sickening clarity. "Morwen," she whispered. "Lady Morwen. She was your daughter." Morgana's golden eyes fixed on her, and Ilara felt as if she were staring into the heart of a forge. Clever girl. Yes, Morwen was my daughter, my precious child, my perfect creation. And this monster, she gestured toward Gareth with one elegant hand, murdered her before she could fulfill her destiny. Her destiny was to destroy everything, Gareth snarled, finding his voice at last. You corrupted her, turned her into a vessel for something that should never have been wakened. I gave her power, Morgana snapped, and suddenly the temperature in the grove began to rise. The moss beneath their feet started to smoke, and the air itself seemed to ripple with heat. I gave her the strength to take what was rightfully ours. For too long, the old bloodlines have hidden in shadows, while lesser beings ruled the world above. It was time for the true nobility to reclaim their throne. She took another step forward, and Ilara could see that her feet weren't quite touching the ground. She floated inches above the forest floor, supported by currents of magic that made the air around her dance like flame. But you ruined everything, dear nephew. You murdered my daughter and scattered her carefully gathered power to the four winds. Do you have any idea how long it took me to find and reclaim even a fraction of what was lost? Gareth drew his sword, the steel ringing as it cleared the scabbard. The blade gleamed silver in the firelight, and Ilara could see runes carved along its length that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Stay back, Morgana. This place is sacred. Your dark magic has no power here. Doesn't it? Morgana raised one hand, and the healing spring began to boil. Steam rose from its surface, and the crystal-clear water turned black as ink. You forget, dear boy, I am of the old blood too, older and purer than anything that flows in your corrupted veins. This place recognizes its true mistress. The silver birch trees began to wither, their glowing bark turning gray and cracked. The white flowers fell like snow, but when they hit the ground, they burst into flame. Why? Ilara found her voice at last, though it came out as barely a whisper. Why did you bring me here? Why the charade with the village, the condemnation? Morgana's smile was terrible to behold. Because, my dear child, you are the key to everything. You carry not just the old blood, but the purest strain of it I have encountered in centuries. Your power is raw, untrained, dangerous, perfect for my purposes. She gestured, and invisible hands seized Ilara, lifting her off the ground and pulling her away from Gareth's protective reach. You see, when dear Gareth destroyed my daughter's vessel, he scattered her essence across the spiritual realm. But with the right catalyst, with someone whose power resonates at the perfect frequency, I can call that essence back. I can resurrect my daughter in a new form. You're insane, Gareth breathed, advancing with his sword raised. Ilara is innocent. She's done nothing to deserve this. Innocent? Morgotha cackled. She's killed more people than you have, nephew. Every time she tries to help someone, death follows. The Roses, the baker's boy's grandfather, the 3 travelers who collapsed with heart failure the day after she blessed their journey. Oh yes, I've been watching her for months, waiting for her power to ripen. Ilara felt tears streaming down her face. I never meant to hurt anyone. I don't understand how. Because you're using raw life force without training, without control. Morgotha's voice rose to a shriek. Every time you channel power to heal or help, you tear it from someone else. The universe demands balance, and you're too ignorant to guide where that balance falls. The invisible hands holding Ilara began to squeeze, and she gasped in pain. Gareth roared and charged forward, his silver sword blazing with holy light, but Morgotha simply waved her hand, and he slammed into what felt like a wall of solid air.
Now then, Morgotha said conversationally, as if she wasn't slowly crushing the life out of Ilara. Let me explain how this is going to work. I'm going to use your untrained power to tear a hole between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Through that hole, I'll call back my daughter's essence. And then, my dear, she's going to need a new body to inhabit. Understanding hit Ilara like a physical blow. You're going to let her possess me? Oh, not just possess, darling. Morwen is going to completely replace you. Your soul will be snuffed out like a candle flame, and in your body, my daughter will have access to power beyond imagination. Together, we'll reshape this world as it should have been shaped centuries ago. Gareth struggled against the invisible barrier holding him, his sword cutting futile arcs through the air. I won't let you do this! You can't stop me, Morgotha said simply. You're half monster yourself, nephew. The darkness I planted in you 10 years ago has been growing, feeding on your guilt and self-hatred. How long do you think before you lose yourself completely? How long before you become the very thing you've been fighting against? As her words had power, Gareth suddenly staggered. His hand flew to his chest, and Ilara could see something moving beneath his tunic, shadows that writhed and coiled like living things. Feel it growing? Morgotha purred, the wolf inside you clawing its way to the surface. You could let it out, you know. Stop fighting it. Join me, and I'll give you the power to control the change instead of being controlled by it. For a moment, Gareth's eyes flickered from blue to golden yellow, and his face contorted with pain. But then he looked at Ilara, hanging helpless in the grip of Morgotha's magic, and something inside him seemed to settle. No, he said quietly. I'd rather die human than live as a monster. He raised his sword again, and this time, instead of striking at Morgotha, he turned the blade on himself.
the point pressed against his chest, directly over his heart. "If you kill her," he said, his voice steady despite the pain etched across his features, "I'll destroy the vessel you're trying to create. You'll have nothing left of either of us." Morgatha's confident smile faltered for the first time. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Gareth's eyes met Ilara's across the grove. "I've lived with this darkness for 10 years, Morgatha. Tired of fighting, tired of being afraid of what I might become. If I can save one innocent life by ending this—"
"Stop!" Morgatha shrieked, and the invisible hands released Ilara so suddenly she crashed to the ground. "You fool! Do you have any idea what forces you're meddling with?" But Gareth had already begun to press the sword forward, and the silver blade began to pierce his skin. A single drop of blood welled up and trickled down the length of the steel. That was when everything changed. The moment Gareth's blood touched the ancient runes carved into his blade, the grove exploded with light. Not the harsh, burning radiance of Morgatha's power, but something older, cleaner, purer as starlight and twice as bright. The withered trees straightened and bloomed. The poisoned spring cleared and began to sing once more, and Ilara felt something awakening inside her. Not the wild, chaotic force that had brought so much death, but something controlled, something that felt like coming home. Morgatha screamed, a sound like the death of kingdoms, as the holy light seared her transformed flesh. "This isn't possible! The old magic is dead!" "No," said a new voice, gentle as summer rain. "It was only sleeping." Through the blazing light stepped a figure that made them all gasp in wonder. She was tall and graceful, with silver hair that flowed like water, and eyes the color of moonlit sky. Her robes seemed to be woven from starlight itself, and when she moved, she left footprints that bloomed with tiny white flowers. "Hello, sister," she said to Morgatha. "It's been far too long."
Morgatha staggered backward, her beautiful face contorting with rage and fear. "Liraeli, you're dead! I felt you die when the old kingdom fell!" The silver-haired woman smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise after the longest night. "Death is not the end for those who serve the true balance, dear sister. I have been waiting in the spaces between worlds, watching, preparing for this moment." Ilara struggled to her feet, her mind reeling. Another sister, another member of Gareth's mysterious bloodline. But where Morgatha radiated corrupted power and barely contained fury, this Liraeli seemed to embody peace itself. I don't understand. Who are you?" Liraeli turned her moonlit gaze toward her, and Ilara felt warmth spreading through her chest, the same warmth she had felt when Gareth first touched her hand, but magnified 100-fold. "I am Liraeli Silverwood, the last true guardian of the summer court. And you, dear child, are the daughter I never had the chance to raise." The words hit Ilara like a physical blow. "That's impossible. My parents died when I was a baby. My grandmother raised me in Raven's Hollow." "Your grandmother was my most trusted friend," Liraeli said gently. "When I realized that Morgatha had been corrupted by the ancient darkness, I knew she would come for you. You carry the pure bloodline, Ilara, the ability to channel life force without the corruption that has tainted our family for generations. I gave you to Elena Blackthorn to raise, hoping you would be safer among ordinary folk." Morgatha snowered, her golden eyes blazing with hatred. "Lies, pretty lies to cover up your cowardice. You abandoned your duty, sister. You left me to face the darkness alone." "I left you to face the consequences of your choices," Lorelei replied sadly. "You invited the darkness in, Morgatha. You opened the door and welcomed it with both hands because you thought it would give you the power to reshape the world according to your will." She gestured toward Gareth, who was still standing with his sword pressed to his chest, watching the exchange with wonder and confusion. "Even after you corrupted the Silverwood Knight, even after you turned the Sacred Order into monsters, I hoped you might find your way back to the light. But when you began hunting Ilara, when you decided to use an innocent girl as a vessel for your dead daughter—" "Morwen was perfect," Morgatha screamed. "She could have ruled this world as it was meant to be ruled." "She was a child twisted by your ambition," Lorelei said firmly. "And now you want to do the same to another innocent. That ends here." Ilara found her voice at last. If you're my mother, why didn't you come for me sooner? Why did you let me suffer alone, thinking I was cursed?"
Pain flickered across Lorelei's beautiful features. "Because coming to you would have led Morgatha straight to your door. As long as I remained hidden, you had a chance at a normal life. I prayed that your power would never manifest, that you could live and die as an ordinary woman." "But it did manifest," Ilara said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "And I've killed people. Every time I try to help someone, someone else dies. How is that a gift? How is that anything but a curse?" Lorelei stepped forward and gently cupped Ilara's face in her hands. Her touch was cool and soothing, like a gentle breeze on a summer day. "Because you've been using it wrong, my darling. You've been trying to create life force where none exists, pulling it from random sources because you don't know how to access the true wellspring." "What wellspring?" Instead of answering with words, Lorelei placed her hand over Ilara's heart. Immediately, Ilara felt something shift inside her, like a locked door swinging open. She gasped as power flowed through her, not the chaotic, dangerous force she had wielded before, but something clean and controlled and infinitely vast. "The earth itself," the relay whispered. "The endless cycle of life and death and rebirth. You don't need to steal life from one person to give it to another, Ilara. You can draw on the eternal source that flows beneath all things." As understanding dawned, Ilara felt the last pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. She turned toward the poison spring, where the water still ran black and foul from Morgatha's corruption. Extending her hand, she reached out with this new power, not to force or command, but simply to ask. The spring responded immediately. The black water began to clear, the poison dissolving as if it had never been there. Within moments, the crystal song returned, and tiny silver fish began to dart through the depths once more. "Impossible," Morgatha breathed. "She's barely trained. She can't have that level of control." "She has something you never did, sister," Lorelei said sadly. "She has a pure heart, power without corruption, strength without cruelty. She is what you could have been if you had chosen differently." Morgatha's face twisted with jealousy so intense it was almost painful to look upon. "If I cannot have her power, then no one can. She raised both hands, and the air around her began to crackle with dark energy.
But before she could unleash her attack, Gareth stepped between them. The silver sword in his hands blazed with holy light, and for the first time since Ilara had met him, he looked truly at peace. "No more," he said quietly. "This ends now." The curse that had been eating at him for 10 years, the darkness that Magatha had planted in his soul, seemed to evaporate in the face of Lirale's pure light. His shadow on the grove wall was human once more, and his blue eyes held no trace of the wolf's gold. "You think you can stop me, nephew?" Magatha snarled. "I am power incarnate. I am—" "You are my aunt," Gareth said simply. "You are family, and I forgive you." The words struck Magatha like physical blows. She staggered backward, her carefully maintained beauty beginning to crack and fade. "No, you can't! You don't understand what I've done!" "I understand perfectly. You lost someone you loved, and the grief drove you mad. You made terrible choices trying to bring her back, but that doesn't make you irredeemable." Tears began to stream down Magatha's face, and as they fell, her false youth continued to crumble away. She was aging rapidly, becoming the bent crone Ilara had first seen in the village square, and then older still, ancient beyond measure, weighted down by centuries of guilt and self-hatred. I can't stop. The darkness won't let me. It feeds on my pain, my rage, my love for my dead daughter. Every time I try to let go, it pulls me back in." Lirale stepped forward, her expression filled with compassion rather than condemnation. "Then let us help you let go." She extended her hand toward her sister, and after a moment's hesitation, Ilara stepped up beside her. The power flowing between them was unlike anything Ilara had ever felt, not the chaotic force that had brought so much death, but something healing and pure and infinitely gentle. "It's time to rest, sister. It's time to let the pain end." For a moment, hope flickered in Morgatha's ancient eyes. She reached out, her gnarled fingers almost touching theirs. And then something else seized control of her body. Her eyes rolled back until only the white showed, and when she spoke, it was in a voice like grinding stone, like the death of stars, like everything cold and empty and hungry in the universe. "The vessel may be flawed, but it will suffice. I have waited too long to be denied now." The grove began to shake, and cracks appeared in the earth beneath their feet. This was no longer just Morgatha's corrupted magic. This was the ancient evil she had made a pact with so many years ago, finally claiming its prize. And Ilara realized with growing horror that their family reunion was about to become a battle for the fate of the world itself.
The thing that had taken control of Morgatha's body began to change. Her limbs stretched and twisted, bones cracking as they extended beyond human proportions. Her fingers became claws of shadow and bone, and her face was no longer recognizable as anything that had ever been human. It was a void in the shape of features, a hungry darkness that seemed to devour light itself. "Do you know what I am, children?" it asked, and its voice was the sound of civilizations falling, of hope dying, of everything good in the world being slowly consumed. "I am the first hunger, the original sin. I am what your ancestors feared when they huddled around their fires and told stories of the things that dwelt in the darkness beyond. Gareth raised his sword, but the blade that had blazed with holy light moments before now flickered and dimmed. The creature's presence was like a weight pressing down on everything pure and good in the world. I have many names, it continued, taking a step forward on legs that bent in too many places. The Devourer, the Void Walker, the hunger that feeds on light, but you may call me inevitable. Lirelei stepped protectively in front of Ilara, her starlight robes flaring with defensive power. You have no claim here, Ancient One. This grove is sacred, protected by bonds older than your awakening. The creature that had been Morgotha laughed, and the sound made the silver birch trees wither and die. Sacred to whom? Your precious summer court is dust and memory. The old gods sleep, if they exist at all. There is nothing left to protect you but your own fading power. It was true, and they all knew it. Ilara could feel the sacred protections of the grove crumbling under the creature's presence. The healing spring boiled and steamed, the moss beneath their feet turned black and brittle, and even the air itself seemed to grow thick and poisonous. "What do you want?" Ilara asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The void that served as the creature's face turned toward her, and she felt its hunger like a physical weight pressing against her soul. "What I have always wanted, child. Everything. Every drop of life, every spark of joy, every moment of love and beauty and hope. I want to consume it all until nothing remains but perfect, eternal emptiness. And you think possessing me will help you do that?" "Not just possessing you," the creature purred. "Becoming you. Your power is the key to breaking the barriers that have kept me bound to this insignificant realm. With your ability to channel pure life force, I can tear open doorways to every world that exists. I can spread my hunger across all of creation." Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the growing cold in the grove. "That's why you corrupted Morgotha. You needed someone to find me, to bring me to you." "The woman was so eager to be used," the creature said with what might have been amusement. "She thought she was serving her own ends, gathering power to resurrect her precious daughter. She never realized that her daughter's death was my doing, a necessary step to ensure her complete corruption." "You killed Morwym?" Gareth snarled, his sword blazing brighter as his rage gave it new strength. "I guided her to make the choices that would lead to her death," the creature corrected. "Just as I guided you to kill her, Knight. Just as I guided every tragedy that has led us to this moment. The girl's supposed curse, the fear and hatred of the villagers, even her rescue by the gallant knight, all of it orchestrated to bring us here, to this place where the barriers between worlds are thinnest." Ilara's mind reeled. "The things I did, the people who died when I tried to help them? My influence, child. Every time you used your power, I was there, twisting it,
ensuring that death would follow in your wake, building your guilt, your self-hatred, your desperate desire to understand and control your abilities, making you ready to accept any explanation, any training, any mentor who promised to help you make sense of it all. Liralay's face was pale with horror. "Even me," she whispered, "even my appearance here?" "Oh, especially you," the creature said with satisfaction. "Did you really think you could hide from me forever, last daughter of the summer court? I have been watching you, waiting for you to reveal yourself. Your maternal instincts were always your weakness." The full scope of the trap became clear to Ilara in that moment. Everything, her entire life, every choice she had made, every person she had met, had been manipulated by this ancient evil to bring her to this exact moment. The despair was overwhelming, crushing, absolute. But then Gareth's hand found hers, warm and solid and utterly human, and on her other side, Liralay's fingers interlaced with her own, carrying the warmth of a mother's love that had waited 17 years to finally touch her daughter. "It doesn't matter," Ilara said, and her voice was stronger now. "It doesn't matter how we got here or why. What matters is what we choose to do now." The creature tilted its terrible head. "And what do you think you can do, child? You are one untrained girl, one corrupted knight, and one fading remnant of a dead court. I am eternal. I am inevitable."
"Maybe," Ilara admitted, "but you made one mistake in all your planning."
"And what might that be?"
Ilara smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt truly at peace. "You assumed I was alone, but I'm not, am I? I have family." She looked at Gareth, seeing in his eyes the same resolve that filled her own heart. "And I have someone who understands what it means to carry darkness inside you and choose the light anyway." She turned to Liralay, seeing a mother's fierce protectiveness blazing in those moonlit eyes. "And I have someone who never gave up hope, even when hope seemed impossible." The three of them joined hands, forming a circle in the heart of the dying grove. And as their power began to flow together, Ilara's pure life force, Gareth's silver-blessed strength, and Liralay's ancient wisdom, something extraordinary happened. The creature that had been Morgatha took a step backward. "No, this is not possible. I have planned for centuries." "You planned for everything except the one thing that has always been your downfall," Liralay said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "Love. The love of a mother for her daughter, of a knight for those he has sworn to protect, of a girl who refuses to let her pain turn her into a monster." The grove began to brighten, but not with the harsh light of battle magic. This was the gentle radiance of dawn, of spring returning after the longest winter, of hope rekindled in the darkest hour. But even as their combined power pushed back the creature's influence, Ilara knew it wouldn't be enough. The thing was too old, too powerful, too deeply rooted in the fabric of reality itself. They might drive it back for a time, but it would return, and next time it would be ready for their resistance. There was only one way to end this permanently, and it would cost her everything.
As their combined power flowed together, Ilara could feel the true extent of what they were facing. The creature wasn't just ancient, it was fundamental, a part of the universe's design. As long as there was light, there would be darkness to balance it. As long as there was life, there would be forces that sought to devour it. But understanding the creature's nature also revealed its weakness. "It needs a host," she whispered, the realization dawning like a cold sunrise. "That's why it corrupted Morgatha, why it wants to possess me. It can't exist in our world without a vessel to anchor it." Gareth's grip on her hand tightened. "Ilara, whatever you're thinking." "It's the only way," she said softly, even as her heart broke at the look of understanding in his eyes. "If I let it possess me completely, if I become its vessel, then when I die, it dies with me." "No!" Liralay's voice was fierce with maternal protectiveness. "I won't lose you again. There has to be another way." "There isn't." Ilara could see the path clearly now, as if someone had lit torches along a dark road. "This is what I was meant for. Not to rule or to reshape the world, but to save it. To be the lock that keeps this thing chained forever." The creature seemed to sense the shift in her resolve. Its void face turned toward her with hungry eagerness. "Yes, child, you begin to understand. Let me in. Let me show you the wonders I can accomplish with your power." "I understand perfectly," Ilara said, releasing her companion's hands and stepping forward. "You want a vessel? You want someone with the power to channel pure life force? Then take me." "Ilara, don't!" Gareth lunged toward her, but invisible bonds held him back. Not the creature's power this time, but her own, protecting him from what was about to happen. She spread her arms wide, opening herself completely to the creature's influence. "Come on then. If you want me so badly, take me." The thing that had been Morgatha shrieked with triumph and lunged forward, its essence pouring into Ilara like a tide of liquid night. She screamed as the corruption filled her, as her very soul was pushed aside to make room for this ancient hunger. For a moment, it seemed as though the creature had won. Ilara's eyes rolled back, showing only white, and when she straightened, it was with inhuman grace. Dark veins spread across her skin like spider webs, and when she smiled, it was with the cruel satisfaction of something that had finally claimed its prize. "At last," she said, but her voice was layered with harmonics that never belonged to any human throat. "At long last, I am." But then she paused, confusion flickering across her corrupted features. Something was wrong. The power it had expected to find, the pure life force that would have allowed it to tear open doorways between worlds, it wasn't there.
"What have you done?" the creature snarled, and now it was clearly speaking through Ilara's mouth. Ilara's consciousness, pushed to the very edges of her own mind, managed a weak laugh. "I told you I understood. You want to consume everything, to drain the life from all of creation. So I'm giving you exactly what you want." The creature tried to access her power, to draw on the wellspring of life force that should have been at her command. Instead, it found nothing, an empty void where her abilities should have been. "Impossible!" it raged. "You carry the pure bloodline. Your power is gone," whispered Ilara. "I gave it away, every last drop of it. I poured it into the earth itself, into the roots of every tree, the heart of every flower, the soul of every living thing in these woods. There's nothing left for you to use." It was true. In the moments before she had opened herself to possession, Ilara had done something no bearer of the old blood had ever attempted. She had given away her power completely, not transferring it to another person, but releasing it into the world itself, letting it flow back to the source from which it had originally come. The creature inside her shrieked with rage and frustration, but it was trapped now. It had poured its essence into what it thought would be the perfect vessel, only to find itself imprisoned in a body with no power to draw upon. "You think this changes anything?" it snarled. "I can still kill your friends. I can still spread my corruption through this world." "Can you?" asked Ilara. And now her voice was growing stronger as she began to reassert control over her own body. "You're not feeding on my power anymore. You're feeding on my life force directly. And I'm not exactly planning to live a long, healthy life as your prisoner." The creature's borrowed eyes widened with understanding and horror. "You mean to die? Yes. Take you with me straight into whatever comes after death." Ilara smiled, and for a moment her own personality shone through completely. "I'm sorry," she said to Gareth and Lireli, her voice thick with tears. "I'm so sorry, but this is the only way." She could feel her life beginning to ebb as the creature consumed her from within, desperate now to drain every drop of essence from its prison before it was too late. But she could also feel something else, the power she had given to the forest coming back to her, not as magic she could wield, but as strength to endure what was happening to her. Every tree she had touched with her gift, every flower that bloomed brighter because of her sacrifice, every blade of grass that grew a little greener because of her sacrifice, they were all connected to her now, all lending her their strength for these final moments. "I can feel them," she whispered in wonder. "All of them. Everything that grows and lives and loves in this world. They're all here with me." The creature made one last desperate attempt to break free, to abandon this dying vessel and find another host, but it had poured too much of itself into her, become too intertwined with her life force to escape. "This is not how it ends," it roared. "I am eternal. I am mortal," Ilara said simply, "just like the rest of us." She closed her eyes and let herself fall, felt Gareth catch her as her legs gave out, felt Lyrale's cool hand on her forehead. The grove was brightening around them as the creature's corruption faded, the silver birch trees straightening and blooming once more, the healing spring running clear and sweet. "Ilara," Gareth whispered, his voice breaking. "Stay with us, please." She opened her eyes one last time, looking up at his face, so young, so noble, so full of grief for a girl he had known for less than a day, but had loved with all his heart. "I'm not really dying. I'm just going somewhere else, somewhere the creature can't follow." She smiled, and it was radiant as sunrise. "And I'm taking it with me." The darkness inside her gave one final shriek of rage and terror, and then silence. Ilara Blackthorn, last daughter of the summer court, closed her eyes and passed peacefully into whatever realm awaited her beyond the borders of the world. And with her went the ancient hunger that had threatened to devour all of creation. But death, as Lyrelay had said earlier, is not always the end. The grove fell silent except for the gentle song of the healing spring and the whisper of wind through the silver birch leaves. Gareth knelt beside Ilara's still form, his hand pressed against her chest where no heartbeat stirred. Tears streamed down his face unchecked, each drop hitting the ground and sprouting into tiny white flowers. "She's gone," he whispered. "She's really gone." Lilare knelt on Ilara's other side, her moonlit eyes filled with grief, but also with something else, a kind of patient watching, as if she were waiting for something. "Is she?" she asked softly. Before Gareth could ask what she meant, the ground beneath them began to warm. The tiny flowers that had grown from his tears started to glow with the same gentle light that had filled the grove during their battle with the creature. The light spread outward in ripples, touching every plant, every tree, every blade of grass in the sacred space. And then, impossibly, Ilara's chest rose and fell with a single, shuddering breath. Gareth's hand flew to her throat, feeling for a pulse. There, weak and fluttering, but undeniably there. How is this possible? She gave her power to the forest, Lilare explained, her voice filled with wonder and pride. But in doing so, she became part of it. The trees, the flowers, the very earth itself, they're all connected to her now. They're lending her their life force, just as she lent them hers. Ilara's eyes fluttered open, and they were different now. Still the same emerald green, but with flecks of gold and silver that seemed to shift and dance like sunlight on leaves. When she spoke, her voice carried undertones of wind through branches and water over stones. I am alive," she breathed, wonder coloring every word. "But how? I felt myself dying. I felt the creature die with me." "You did die," Lilare said gently, helping her daughter sit up. "For a moment, you crossed over into the realm beyond death, but the forest called you back. The life you saved by destroying that ancient evil, it wanted to save you in return." Gareth reached out hesitantly, as if afraid she might dissolve at his touch. When his fingers brushed her cheek, she was solid and warm and undeniably real. "Ilara?" She turned to him, and her smile was like the first day of spring. "Hello, Gareth. Thank you for catching me when I fell." "I'll always catch you," he said, without thinking, then blushed at the boldness of the declaration. Ilara's smile widened, and she reached up to touch the scar on his cheek, the mark of his battle with the corruption that had been lifted from him forever. "I know you will."
As she struggled to stand, both Gareth and Lirelay supporting her,
Ilara became aware of something extraordinary. She could feel everything in the grove. Every root, every leaf, every drop of water in the sacred spring. But more than that, she could sense the network of life that spread out from this place, connecting to forests and fields and gardens throughout the kingdom. "The power," she whispered. "It's still there, but it's different now." "You're different now," Lirelei confirmed. "You've become something new, something that has never existed before. Not just a bearer of the old blood, but a guardian of the balance between life and death, growth and decay, order and chaos." As if to demonstrate, Ilara kneeled and placed her hand on a patch of ground where the creature's corruption had left the earth blackened and lifeless. Green shoots immediately began to push through the soil, growing and blooming at an impossible rate. But this time, there was no corresponding death elsewhere. The life she was channeling came from the willing gift of the forest around them, part of the natural cycle, rather than a theft from it. "I can control it now. I can actually control it." A new voice spoke from the edge of the grove, making them all turn in alarm. But this time, it was not an enemy. "Of course you can control it," said the bent figure, shuffling toward them through the trees. It was Morgatha, but not the ancient evil that had possessed her, nor the beautiful sorceress she had made herself appear to be. This was simply an old woman, bent with years and sorrow, but with eyes that held sanity for the first time in decades. "Aunt," said Gareth carefully, his hand moving instinctively to his sword hilt. "How are you? Alive? Sane? Free of the creature that has been puppeting me for the better part of a century?" Morgatha's laugh was bitter, but genuinely amused. "When the Ancient One died, it took all of its corruption with it. For the first time and longer than I care to remember, my thoughts are my own." She approached slowly, clearly aware of the threat she still represented in their eyes. When she was close enough, she knelt before Ilara with difficulty, her ancient joints creaking like old wood. "Child," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears, "can you ever forgive a foolish old woman who lost herself to grief so completely that she nearly destroyed the world?" Ilara studied the woman who had condemned her, who had dragged her into the woods to die, who had been the instrument of so much pain and suffering. But all she saw now was someone who had been as much a victim of the ancient evil as anyone else. "There's nothing to forgive," she said gently, helping Morgatha to her feet. "You weren't yourself. You were being used, just like I was."
"I made the choice," Morgatha insisted. "When my daughter died, when the grief threatened to consume me, I made the choice to seek power in dark places rather than accept my loss and heal. Everything that happened afterward, it all stems from that moment of weakness." "Then learn from it," Lirelei said, stepping forward to embrace her sister for the first time in centuries. "Help us ensure that no one else makes the same mistake." As the three women, the ancient sisters and the daughter who had saved them all, stood together in the healing light of the grove, Gareth felt a profound sense of completion.
The curse that had haunted his bloodline for generations was finally broken. The Silverwood Knights could be reborn, not as solitary guardians fighting against the darkness, but as protectors working in harmony with the natural world. But there was still one question that needed answering. "What happens now?" he asked. "The people of Ravenshallow still think Ilara is cursed. They'll never accept her back." Ilara looked at him with those strange new eyes, and he saw wisdom there that seemed far older than her 17 years. "Then we don't go back to Ravenshallow," she said simply. "We build something new." She gestured to the grove around them, where flowers bloomed in impossible profusion, and the very air seemed to shimmer with benevolent magic. This place was sacred once, a center of learning and healing. It could be again. "You mean to stay here?" Lyreli asked. "I mean to make it a haven, a place where people with the old blood can come to learn control instead of being driven out by fear, where those who are different can find acceptance instead of condemnation." She looked at Gareth, and something passed between them that was deeper than words. "I can't do it alone, though. I'll need help from someone who understands what it means to carry power that others fear." Gareth knelt before her, his sword across his palms in the ancient gesture of fealty. But when he spoke, it wasn't to a queen or a goddess. It was to the girl who saved the world and asked for nothing in return.
"I pledge my sword to your service, Lady Ilara," he said, formally. Then, with a smile that transformed his scarred face, he added, "And my heart, if you'll have it." Ilara's laughter was like silver bells in the morning air. "I think I can manage both," she said, leaning down to kiss him gently. When their lips touched, flowers bloomed spontaneously throughout the grove, and the healing spring began to sing with renewed joy. Even Morgotha smiled, though tears were streaming down her ancient cheeks. "My daughter would have liked you," she told Ilara. "The real Morwen, I mean, before the corruption took her. She always wanted to help people too." "Then we'll help people in her memory," Ilara said simply. "All of us together." As the sun set over the whispering woods, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the four of them began to plan. They would rebuild the ancient sanctuary, create a school for those with gifts they didn't understand, establish a new order of knights dedicated to protection rather than conquest. But perhaps most importantly, they would ensure that no one would ever again have to face their darkness alone.
The Academy of the Silver Grove had become legend throughout the kingdom and beyond. People spoke in whispers of the place hidden deep in the whispering woods, where miracles happened daily, and those who had been cast out by their communities could find new hope. Ilara stood in the main courtyard of the rebuilt temple, watching her students practice their gifts under the guidance of Master Gareth. What had once been ruins was now a thriving center of learning, with dormitories for the students, libraries filled with recovered knowledge of the old ways, and gardens that bloomed year-round under her careful tending. A young boy was struggling to heal a withered flower, his face screwed up in concentration as he tried to force his power to work. Ilara could see the problem immediately. He was fighting his gift instead of working with it, just as she had done for so long. "Thomas," she said gently, kneeling beside him.
It was a different Thomas than the baker's son she had accidentally healed years ago, but the name seemed common among boys his age. "What are you trying to do?" "Make it bloom," the boy said through gritted teeth. "Master Morgatha said I should be able to do it easy, but it won't work." Ilara smiled. Morgatha had proven to be an excellent teacher, once freed from the ancient evil's influence, though she still had a tendency toward impatience with students who reminded her too much of her younger self. "May I?" Ilara asked, placing her hand over the boy's smaller one. "Don't try to force the flower to bloom. Ask it what it needs. Listen to what it's trying to tell you." Together they reached out with their combined power, not demanding, but requesting. The flower's needs became clear immediately. Not just sunlight and water, but understanding, patience, and time to grow at its own pace. Under their gentle encouragement, the withered bloom began to straighten and fill out, color returning to its petals in a slow wave of renewal. But this time there were no consequences, no hidden costs. The life came from the willing participation of the entire garden, each plant contributing a tiny portion of its vitality to help its struggling neighbor.
As the boy ran off to show his friends his success, Ilara became aware of a familiar presence behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know that Gareth was watching her with that look of quiet pride that never failed to make her heart skip a beat. "You're getting good at that," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I had good teachers," she replied, leaning back against his chest. "Speaking of which, how are the new knights coming along?" The Order of the Silver Grove had attracted warriors from across the kingdom, men and women who were tired of serving petty lords and wanted to dedicate their lives to protecting the innocent and preserving the balance between the natural and mundane worlds. "Better than expected," Gareth said. "Sir Marcus actually managed to communicate with the forest spirits during his trial yesterday. And Lady Catherine's healing abilities are progressing faster than anyone thought possible." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their students and knights go about their evening routines. The academy was home to nearly 100 people now, from children as young as 8 to adults who had spent decades hiding their gifts from the world. "Any word from the capital?" Ilara asked. "The usual," Gareth replied. "King Edward still wants to meet with you to discuss mutual cooperation between the Crown and the Academy. Lord Aldrich is pushing for an official alliance, and at least 3 minor nobles have sent marriage proposals." Ilara laughed. "Marriage proposals? They do realize I'm already spoken for, don't they?" "Apparently, some people think they can make a better offer than a reformed knight with a tragic past and a tendency toward brooding." Ilara mused, turning in his arms to face him. "Might have a point about the brooding." Gareth's mocked wounded expression made her laugh again, and she reached up to trace the scar on his cheek, a mark that had become dear to her over the years, a reminder of how far they had both come. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" she asked. "Only every day, but I never get tired of hearing it." Their kiss was interrupted by a polite cough from behind them. They turned to see Lirelai approaching, her ageless beauty now softened by genuine happiness rather than the sad wisdom she had carried for so long.
"Sorry to interrupt," she said with a smile, "but we have visitors at the gate. A delegation from the Kingdom of Astoria asking for sanctuary for their youngest prince. Apparently, the boy has been manifesting abilities that his father considers unnatural." Ilara sighed. Even after 5 years of the Academy's growing reputation, there were still parents who saw their children's gifts as curses to be hidden or eliminated rather than talents to be nurtured. "Of course," she said. "Have them brought to the welcome hall. I'll speak with them personally." As Lorelia departed to carry out her instructions, Gareth squeezed Alara's hand gently. "You know, we could probably have one of the other masters handle this. You've been working non-stop for weeks." "And missed the chance to save another child from going through what I went through?" Ilara shook her head. "I don't think so. Besides, this is what we're here for." She started toward the main building, then paused and looked back at him. "Come with me. I could use the moral support. And your intimidating presence might help convince them to leave the boy here willingly rather than trying to sneak him away in the middle of the night." "Has that actually happened?" Gareth asked, falling into step beside her. "Twice," Ilara replied grimly. "Some people prefer their problems to simply disappear rather than be solved." They made their way through the Academy's corridors, passing classrooms where evening lessons were in session. In one room, Morgatha was teaching a group of teenagers about the history of the old bloodlines, her sharp wit keeping them engaged despite the dry subject matter. In another, former knights were learning to mediate disputes without violence, a skill that proved surprisingly difficult for those trained primarily in warfare. The welcome hall was a large, comfortable space designed to put nervous parents and frightened children at ease. Tapestries depicting scenes of natural beauty covered the walls, and a fire crackled merrily in the hearth, despite the warm evening air. The Astorian delegation was exactly what Ilara had expected. Overdressed nobles trying to look sympathetic while clearly wanting to be anywhere else, flanked by guards who kept their hands near their weapons, despite being in a place of acknowledged sanctuary.
But it was the boy who captured her attention immediately. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with dark hair and eyes that held the same desperate confusion she remembered from her own childhood. He sat hunched in on himself, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. And when their eyes met across the room, she saw recognition there, the look of someone who had finally found others who might understand. "Your Majesty," said the lead nobleman, rising and offering a perfunctory bow. "I am Duke Aldwin of Astoria. Allow me to present Prince Marcus, third son of King Harold." The boy flinched at being introduced, and Alara's heart went out to him. Third son, she noted. Spare heir at best, and now a problem to be solved rather than a person to be helped. "Welcome to the Academy of the Silver Grove," Ilara said formally, then abandoned protocol and knelt beside the prince's chair. "And what would you prefer to be called? I imagine Prince Marcus gets tiresome after a while." The boy looked up at her with surprise, clearly not used to adults asking his preference about anything. Just Marcus, please, Your Majesty." "I'm not a queen, Marcus. I'm Ilara, and this is Gareth. We run this place together." She gestured to the chairs across from him. "May we sit with you? I'd like to hear your story, if you're willing to share it." As the boy began to haltingly describe the incidents that had led to his exile, windows exploding when he was angry, plants withering when he was sad, servants fleeing in terror when strange lights began to dance around his hands, Ilara found herself transported back to her own childhood. The fear, the confusion, the desperate desire to be normal that only made everything worse. But there was one crucial difference. Marcus wouldn't have to face his future alone. When he finished his story, tears streaming down his young face, Ilara reached out and gently took his hands in hers. "Marcus, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are not cursed. You are not a monster. You are not broken or wrong or dangerous. You have a gift that you don't understand yet, but that's okay. We're going to help you understand it." She felt the familiar warmth of power flowing between them. But this time, it wasn't her magic reaching out to him. It was his responding to hers, recognizing a kindred spirit after so many months of isolation and fear. "Really?" he whispered.
"Really," she confirmed. "Would you like to stay here and learn with us? There are other children your age and teachers who understand what you're going through. You'll never have to be afraid of your abilities again." The transformation in the boy's face was remarkable. Hope replaced despair, and for the first time since they had entered the room, he sat up straight and looked directly at the adults around him. "Yes," he said firmly. "Yes, please. I want to stay." The negotiations with the Astorian delegation took another hour, but the outcome was never in doubt. They wanted to be rid of their problem prince, and Ilara wanted to save another child from the fate she had almost suffered. By the time the visitors departed, Marcus was already being shown to his new dormitory room by some of the older students, his laughter echoing through the corridors as they regaled him with stories of their own early days at the academy. "Another happy ending," Gareth observed, as they watched the delegation's carriage disappear into the woods. "Another beginning," Ilara corrected. "The happy ending is still being written." They made their way back through the academy, checking on the evening activities and saying goodnight to students heading to bed. In the main courtyard, they paused by the fountain that had been built around the original healing spring. The water still sang its crystal song, and the silver fish that dwelt within it seemed to glow with their own inner light. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had made different choices? If you hadn't saved me in the forest, if I hadn't been willing to sacrifice myself to destroy the creature, if Morgotha had never found redemption? Sometimes, Arthur admitted. But then I remember that we didn't just make different choices, we made the right choices, and that's what brought us here. He pulled her close, and they swayed together in the moonlight, dancing to music only they could hear. Around them, the academy slept peacefully, protected by powerful wards and watched over by gentle spirits that once had been their enemies. "Arthur," Ilara said softly. "Yes? Do you think they'll write songs about us someday? About the witch who wasn't really cursed, and the knight who saved her from the darkness?"
Gareth considered this seriously. "I think they'll write songs about you," he said finally. "About the girl who chose to save the world even though the world had been cruel to her. About the founder of a place where the different and the gifted can find acceptance and purpose. And what about you, the last of the Silverwood Knights who helped rebuild the Order from nothing?" "I think," Gareth said with a smile, "I'll be remembered as the luckiest man who ever lived, because I got to love you." As they kissed under the starlight, surrounded by the academy they had built together, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the main building. Morgotha stood at her window, a cup of tea cooling in her hands, and smiled as she watched her nephew and the girl who had become the daughter she never had. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to make the world a little brighter and a little safer. But tonight, all was peaceful in the Academy of the Silver Grove, and love had indeed conquered all. And so we reach the end of our tale, dear listeners.
What began with accusations of curses and condemnation in a village square ended with the founding of a sanctuary where the gifted and the different could find their place in the world. But the true lesson of Ilara's story is not about magic or knights or ancient evils. It is about the choices we make when the world turns against us. When faced with fear and hatred, we can choose to let it harden our hearts and turn us bitter. Or we can choose compassion, understanding, and the belief that even the darkest circumstances can be transformed by love and sacrifice. Ilara Blackthorn was condemned as a witch and left to die in a cursed forest, but she chose to see the pain behind her persecutors' fear, chose to forgive those who had wronged her, and ultimately chose to give her life to save a world that had never shown her kindness. In doing so, she didn't just defeat an ancient evil. She proved that heroism isn't about having power, but about how you choose to use whatever gifts you've been given. Sometimes the greatest magic of all is simply refusing to let cruelty make you cruel in return. Sometimes the most powerful spell is choosing hope when the world offers only despair. And sometimes the most important battle is not against monsters or demons, but against the darkness that threatens to grow in our own hearts. For in the end, we are all capable of becoming either the witch who destroys or the guardian who protects. The choice, as always, is ours to make.